Hi, this is Alex from PHP Academy and welcome to this CSS tutorial on Sprites. Now, if you've never come across Sprites before, it's an extremely useful thing to know because it will speed up your page load times, particularly if you have lots of images. Even if these images are, small button images, tiny icons. Essentially what we're trying to do with Sprites, and I'll explain why we do it first of all, then we'll look at this graphic that you can see in front of you. Why do we use Sprites? Well, to use a sprite is a method of incorporating images onto your web page, but at the same time to reduce HTTP requests by only asking for one image, one full image that's broken down into smaller usable images. So I guess that's how you could explain what CSS sprites are. Now in this tutorial we're going to be creating 3 buttons. This is going to be in an unordered list, which you should be familiar with, and we're going to be placing these 3 icons for each button. Now these buttons are going to be separate. They're not going to look like they do in this image. They're going to be separate. They could either be on a new line, but we're going to just separate them, say 10 pixels apart. Now you may be wondering, well, how can we do this? We've just got this single image here. What could we possibly do with this? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to use this image, but we're going to break it down into smaller parts, and we're going to place this first part of the image here, which is 50 pixels wide. The full size of this image is 200 pixels, so it's 200 by 50, height of 50, and each of these buttons is 50 pixels wide, so I've accommodated for the extra border as well. So this is a 2 pixel border here, and this is a 1 pixel border around the edge. So once you've gone into your graphics editor and you've created your buttons, place them all inside one image file. I've just placed these next to each other. They could be on top of one another. They could be in a grid. It doesn't really matter. So the 3 buttons we're going to incorporate on our page are going to be in an unordered list, and we're going to have this is the first one, this is the second one, and this is as the third one. But then we're additionally going to incorporate a hover image. So when we hover over any of the buttons, this tick here appears. So it might sound quite complicated. We've got this one image, we need to somehow break it up using CSS, but it's actually a lot more simple than you would probably first think. So let's go ahead and close this. We know where the file is. We're going to incorporate that in just a moment. But let's go ahead and start building up our markup, and this needs to be an unordered list, as I said. So let's go ahead and create an unordered list. So I've created the container. I'll just go ahead and create each item now. Now I'm not going to place any contents inside of these. Usually what we'd do is we'd place an A tag in there, an anchor tag, and we'd style that anchor tag to have some kind of clickable effect. But I'm not going to waste time by doing that and sort of over explaining. We'll just look at how we can get these images within inside these li containers. Bear in mind, we're not going to be using an image tag. That's probably the most important thing to remember. If we were to use the image tag, we would be including the images separately, which is not what we're doing. So I'm going to give this UL a class of just button because we're going to be creating 3 different buttons. I'll go over to my browser and refresh, and you can see that we've got an unordered list here with no contents. Okay, so there's no contents within each of the list items. So what do we want to do now? Well, we'll need to identify each one of these list items as the button that we want to assign the graphic to. So I'm just going to give them classes of more or less what the buttons represent. The first one was sort of an information symbol, so I'm going to give that a class of info. The second one was sort of a couple of windows, so I'm going to give this a class of multi. And the third one was a fast forward, so I'm just going to call that fast. Okay, so now we've assigned a class to each of our list items, we can go ahead and we can set a background image for each of these list items. But what we're actually going to do is we're going to shift this background image, and we're only going to incorporate the one image. Remember, that's just one HTTP request to retrieve that image instead of 4 different HTTP requests. So we've already cut that down by, from 4 to 1. So inside of primary.css, what do we need to do? Well, let's go ahead and initially style up our unordered list. The first thing we want to do is set the list style to none. The next thing we need to do is go ahead and give a margin of 0 and a padding of 0 also. And that's it for the overall list. Now we want to go ahead and address the list items individually. So we want to use the button selector that I've called my UL, and then for each LI inside of that UL we want to go ahead and set specific properties. Now this is important because remember I said that each of the buttons are 50 by 50 pixels. So we need to create these list items at 50 by 50 pixels. Now it's important that we also display this in a certain way. We want to display it as an inline block. Now by displaying it as an inline block, these list items are going to sit next to each other, and they're also going to display as a block, which means we can give them a width and a height, and we can incorporate the background image and etc. and the hover and everything. So we need to display inline block. And we also, I'm just going to go ahead and set a background. We don't need a background because we're going to be replacing the background color. We could say background color, I suppose, more correctly. We're going to be replacing the background color with the image anyway, so we don't really need this. This is just so we can initially see where these buttons are. And I'm going to set a margin on the right of 10 pixels. Now what that will do is it will achieve this. We've got 3 sort of button areas. Remember, we've got 3 initial button graphics, and then we've got the tick when we hover over. So now what we want to go ahead and do is we want to, for each of these classes that I've created or given to each of these LIs, we need to incorporate this image into it somehow. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with info. So button li.info. So remember, there's no space here. This just means the li within the button with the class of info. And with this, I'm going to set a background URL. So I'm going to say background, or we could again more correctly say background image URL. So the URL is, I'm going to go back a directory because remember I'm within my CSS folder here. I'm going to go into images, and that image I had up at the start of the tutorial is called sprites.png. I'm also then going to say no repeat because I don't want this image to tile across. Although we've chosen 50 by 50 pixel container, we still don't want it to tile. So when I refresh, hopefully, no, nothing's happened. Let's just double check we've got everything correct. Okay, so yeah, there we go. The reason that didn't work, by the way, is because background is the shorthand property, which I can incorporate no repeat into. And by using background image, all we're doing is we're specifying the actual image. So if I was to go ahead and get rid of this now, that would now work. You can see that works. But because I was trying to incorporate this repeat in here, specifying whether it should repeat or not, I need to use the shorthand background property. Okay, so now that we've done that, we've got the result we require for the first item. So it's looking okay. It's got the container filled with this background image now. Okay, so now what do we want to do? Well, we want to go ahead and style up the second LI, which is multi, and we want to apply the little window icon to that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste that down just to save a bit of time. And I'm going to choose the multi-class. Okay, so we're still keeping this sprite image. That's the whole point of the tutorial. However, what do we need to do now? Well, we need to shift this background image. We need to put it in a different position. So if I hit F5, I've refreshed, you can see that we've got the same image up. That's because this is the first 50 pixels height and first 50 pixels width of the overall image. So what we need to do now is we want to shift this. Now, when you're working with sprites, often things get quite complicated, and you don't want to keep going back to your text editor, back to your browser, typing in different values, refreshing. So a really good thing to do here is utilize the Element Explorer in Chrome or Firefox if you're using Firebug. So what you want to do is I'm going to go ahead and inspect the element. So I've got this one selected now. The first one we don't need to worry about because that's displaying as we want. However, what I'm now going to do is I'm going to just click on here and I can edit this property now. So this is the property we've just created inside of our style sheet. What I can actually do is I can amend this property, so I can add to it, and I can go ahead and add a value as I see fit. Now, because we're pushing this image back, we need to use minus figures. So just watch what happens when I do minus 10 pixels. You can already see that you can start to see the overlapping part of the next part of the image. And now watch, I'm going to press up on my keyboard, so the up key on my keyboard, well, down key because I'm going down in numbers, we're going into minus figures, and you can actually see that it starts to move. So as I'm going down with my keyboard key and this figure is getting lower, when I hit minus 50, that will be the point that I need to actually stop. Okay, so we've got minus 50. Remember I said each of the icons was 50 pixels, so minus 50 will show the next icon. So now we've sort of picked up some kind of pattern. We know that the next icon is going to be minus 100 because we want to shift it back 100 pixels. So let's go ahead and if we refresh this, no changes are made. We just do this to experiment before we apply it to our style sheets. So if we go ahead and we type in minus 50 pixels there, back to the browser and refresh, you see that change has taken place. All we've got to do now is we've got to incorporate the last image, then we'll go ahead and incorporate the hover effect as well. Okay, so again I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this and just paste that down. And I'm going to select the fast class. So remember I said that this would be minus 100 because we're going back in 50s because each of the blocks is 50 pixels width. When I refresh, we get that last image just up there. And again, if we click inspect element, we can see that we've got minus 100. By modifying this, we can shift it even more. But we want to keep that icon that we've presently got, and we want to incorporate a hover effect. Now this is just as easy. When we hover over any of these LIs, we want it to change to the tick. Now we already know that the tick is going to be displayed when we have this set to minus 150 because we're again, taking 50 away from this and shifting it 50 pixels back. So what we want to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy this, paste down here. Now remember, this needs to come after everything because it's a hover pseudo class. It can't come before something or it won't take effect. I'm going to get rid of this class and I'm just going to say hover. So when we hover over the LI, we want to show the sprite, but we want to show it at 150 pixels, which will reveal the tick. So now when we go ahead and we refresh, you can see that when we hover over each of the LIs, the image is shown. So we're essentially setting the background image temporarily only on hover to minus 150 pixels of this sprite. So essentially what we've done is we've covered what sprites are, why we use them, which is to reduce HTTP requests, how to incorporate them into like a list item, for example, and you can see no one would know that this is an image just on its own. No one would know that it's just one image. They look like three separate images. We've got this hover effect. Obviously when we click on here, that will show you the full image. But essentially all we've done is we've loaded one image in, but we've used it as 4 different images, the 3 for the main buttons and the 4th one for the hover. So go ahead and incorporate this into menus, hover over effects, small buttons that need a slight change, and it's perfectly acceptable to load any images you use into your website. Obviously not large images, icon size images, smaller images into one file, and then use CSS Sprite positioning to display exactly what you want. So that's CSS Sprites.